Hello, Tom Vecchia here with a very, very special edition of the Armchair MBA. Today, we have a prestigious guest. His name is John Dickie, Professor of Italian Studies at University of College of London, internationally recognized specialist in many aspects of Italian history and also organized crime, as worldwide national coverage, books that literally have been bestsellers all through the board. The Craft, we'll talk about Cosa Nostra, which I consider the Bible of Sicilian Cosa Nostra, some food-related delizia, and Mafia Brotherhoods and Mafia Republic. And in 2005, the president of the Italian Republic appointed John Commendatore dell'Ordine della Stella della Solidarietà Italiana, basically bestowing our guest for Italian knighthood. And this is just partial of his CV. John, welcome to the Armchair MBA. How you doing today?
Very nice to be here, Tom. Thank you.
All right, it's my pleasure. So we're going to jump right in because we want to be sensitive to your time. Can you please start off by sharing, why did you choose Italy as a country to cover as a prestigious journalist, as a prestigious author? You could do anything that you want. Why Italy?
Well, I mean, I did it really as it's an academic kind of career choice. I studied languages at university. I studied French and Italian. I lived for a year in Italy while I was doing the degree. And when I thought about going on to do the academic career, do the PhD, all of that, it was really Italy that attracted me. And it's through through my PhD thesis, that's where I first started doing research on the history of the Mafia.
Interesting.
Happens.
Interesting. So let's start with Cosa Nostra, okay? So, how was it founded and what was its founding principles?
Okay, I mean, we haven't got a story with, three men meeting on a windswept mountain top wearing capes to ceremonially found the Sicilian Mafia.
Correct.
But we have a lot of other clues. And what we've got is a picture that is really very clear now and that all the historians who've looked at this pretty much agree with. And you've got a number of ingredients. The first of all is the violence, the political violence associated with the unification of Italy.
Yes, 1840.
Because Garibaldi and all of that, 1860.
Oh, 1860, sorry, my bad. Yeah.
1860, exactly. The spring of 1860, Garibaldi lands in Marsala and so on, triggers a revolution, basically, in Sicily. Before that, Sicily had been part of the kingdom of the two Sicilies, the sort of mainland south and Sicily. And it had never been happily integrated into that kingdom, shall we say, and there had been periodic revolutions really since 1820 in Sicily. So it was a bit of a revolutionary powder keg. But of course, revolution was a hazardous pursuit at that time. You were committing treason. You were rebelling against the God-given authority of the king.
Yep.
And so the conspirators who wanted to unify Sicily to Italy tended to organize themselves in secret societies as a way of ensuring security and a bigger network. And they joined secret societies like the charcoal burners, which tended to be based on a model associated with Freemasonry. If you ask a member of the Sicilian Mafia today, what is, and one who's turned state's evidence, obviously, what is the Sicilian Mafia? He'll go, well, it's kind of like the Freemasons, only for criminals. The structure's the same. You join, you go through an initiation ritual, you join a local cell of the organization called a familia in the case of Cosa Nostra, or a lodge in the case the Freemasons. You subscribe to a series of myths and, mythical origins and so on. And you have very tight loyalty with that cell, but you're also part of a bigger network. You get credentials that allow you to travel abroad and so on and so forth. And that that template was also useful for these early revolutionaries. And because revolution is also a violent business, they needed to recruit violent men as part of the revolutionary process. You're going to overthrow the state. You're going to get rid of the police. You need people who are tough enough to impose order in the immediate aftermath of the revolution. And all of the early Sicilian mafia bosses that we've been able to, and quite a few now that we can retrace their biographies, all of them come through the revolutions of 1848 and 1860 in particular. And all of them, in one way or another, are associated with revolutions and with the police immediately after unification. They are part of the new police or the National Guard or whatever it is. And it's through those links with those early revolutionaries that they get their first links with members of the establishment. Mafia is a mafia because it's not just a collection of thugs. It's got links to people in power, to entrepreneurs, to judges, to administrators, whoever it might be, to the police, of course, as well. The other factor, so we've got the revolutionary violence, the secret societies, and the sort of fallout of the revolutionary process is the creation of the mafia, exactly, which abandons any political aims because there's no future in revolution, there's no business in revolution at that point, and starts to make money through extortion and trafficking. The other important ingredient, is one particular business, which is the most lucrative business in Sicily at the time. It's what makes the bits of the Sicilian economy very advanced, and that's citrus fruit, the lemon groves. Palermo has a virtual natural monopoly in the production of citrus fruit. At the time, it's exporting huge amounts to the eastern seaboard of the United States in this period. Very valuable cash crop. And the land around Palermo, where the orange and lemon groves are, is some of the most valuable agricultural land in Europe. It's highly productive, highly investment intensive, very modern form of agriculture, but it's very vulnerable to extortion. In a place where the police are in league with organized crime, you create the perfect conditions for extortion rackets. And all of the early mafia bosses work as guards in lemon groves. They become owners of lemon groves, right through the first 40 years of the Sicilian mafia history and beyond. You have this lemon factor in there.
I love it. Well, yeah, and that's why I wanted John. Two things. Number one, you're going to learn things that you never heard before. And that's not well known to kind of like, I call them mobologists, like, whoa, wait a second. The citrus, I need to go down this rabbit hole. The second is, I don't think you have any illusion on who they are. These guys they weren't like these poor migrant people. They sat down and said, hey, you guys need your land protected. We'll protect you. They saw it was profitable. I'm like, wait a second, we might take some of this. Or, you know what? Let's go ahead and go to other people and protect them and then grow from there. But my question to you is, did the Sicilian, I guess, society need Cosa Nostra, or were they kind of like parasitic to that community? Give us kind of your thoughts, John.
No, they're clearly parasitic. They're clearly parasitic. These people are criminals from the outset, even when they're participating in the revolutions of 1860. It's not because they're idealistic patriots. It's because there's money and power to be gained out of that process. You can destroy, you attack the police station and destroy the police records. You can release your friends from prison. You can rob and steal and rape, and you can become the police. And as I said, and think what power that gives you. So, and of course, you can make important friends who are aspiring to gain power. So, yeah, right from this is a criminal organization and always has been. The idea that it somehow expresses the sort of, the essence of an oppressed island and, all of that stuff is complete nonsense.
from an academic viewpoint, because you kind of answered my other question, but so we'll go into this academic viewpoint. Who is maybe a Sicilian Cosa Nostra boss he actually admired and did a good job at his vocation, and who was just not a good boss in your opinion, from the academic view?
Well, I've never really thought about it in those terms because, look, what's smart about the Sicilian mafia is the system,
Yes,
not the individual
correct,
bosses.
correct.
It's, you know, you can get some very stupid, uneducated people making a great career and developing a kind of cunning because they've been brought up within this particularly pernicious, self-perpetuating power system.
Correct.
And the basic cunning required to operate in it is, and the skill, if you like, the tactics applied to pretty much every eventuality
Yeah,
is extortion.
yeah,
It's extortion is absolutely at the heart of everything. And that it doesn't take a lot of smarts to, you know, develop that. You know, it works the same. Kidnapping, various points in its history, the Sicilian mafia has got involved in kidnapping, even though in theory the rules of the organization prohibit kidnapping on Sicilian soil. At various periods it has happened, like pretty much all of the rules of the Sicilian mafia. It's highly flexible. And kidnapping works the same way. You know, we know from kidnappings carried out in the 1870s, 1880s, right up to the end of the century, and then again in another wave in the 1970s. What you do is kidnap their kid or kidnap, you know, a person, and then you make two approaches. On the one hand, you get the terrifying letters that say, "Here's a piece of their ear." And you know, we're going to send them to you in bits if you don't pay this huge sum. And then you get the nice guy coming in and saying, look, I'm huge sympathy with your plight.
yeah.
But you know, I know these guys, or at least I've got contacts. I think I can reason with them. I can get them to accept maybe less money, quite a lot less money. You know, how do you say, if I smooth it out? And of course, both of these, but this is a role-playing game. Both of these guys are mafiosi. That's exactly the technique. The second one is designed to get you to pay up without saying anything, and to move the situation forward. And it's really just a variant of that, you know, simple extortion technique. And extortion is what gets your foot in the door in the world of business and everything like that. You know, you don't have to. Yeah.
I interviewed Salvo Arena, and one of the things that struck me as shocking, I was expecting him. I think he got Toto got arrested when he was around 15, and I was expecting him to say, "Well, we moved from here to here to here to here to here." No, essentially, we're in like one or two places, and although the father didn't gallivant around and they home studied, they had friends. Obviously, they didn't know they were in a family. They weren't in Corleone, but they were hiding like in plain sight and
Mm.
just pretty much like living a semi-normal life. The Toto had dinner with them every night at 6 o'clock. You know, Chena was always together. Sunday dinners, a rite of passage for Italians and Italian Americans on Sunday. But what I found interesting is it kind of hid in plain sight. So how do you do that with not having profound support of the people and the state? Or you, Tom, you know what? The state and the people were in on. You know, like how do
Yeah.
you? So, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It varies from time to time. I mean, this business of going on the run and yet staying on your territory
Yeah,
is a relatively recent development for mafia bosses. I
yeah,
mean, the Corleonesi, Rinas Corleonesi, were the
yeah.
first to really practice it. Mafias are territorial animals
Correct.
by you know, that's what's in
Yeah,
their DNA.
yeah.
And even if you go on a run, you have to remain on your territory because that's what makes you a mafioso, not, you
Correct.
know, anything else you might be able to do.
Right.
That's where you have your support network and so on. what we learn is, you know, very often these guys are hiding not just from the authorities or whatever it might be, they're also hiding from other mafiosi.
Rivals,
That's
yeah.
what makes it a powerful place to, like Riina did,
Yeah.
to organize a war against his you know, the other then dominant factions within Cosa Nostra in the early 1980s.
Correct.
And for that, it's risky to rely on the mafia network itself for protection and for staying in hiding. You tend to operate with a much more restricted circle of supporters, blood relatives, so on and so forth. Riina, we know relatively little about the early phases of his time on the run. It may be because he, you know, inspired such terror, even within the mafia, that he was able to, you know, rely on his organization more. But a more recent case like Matteo Messina Denaro, the last of the Corleonesi, who was captured just a couple of months ago, it's very clear, you know, it was his sister and stuff who were organizing the last stages of his time in hiding, because that's, you know, those are the people he could absolutely trust. Whereas, you know, in the rest of Sicily, particularly Cosa Nostra is what they call a colabrodo in Italian, a sieve, leaking news and penetrated by investigations and so on.
Especially lately. So, okay, so Matteo Messina Denaro gets caught, and he allegedly they took $1 billion from him, not just once, but twice. And we'll get to US in a little bit, but like, that's real money, right? And was it drug money? Was it drug money rolled into construction? How did he amass such enormous wealth?
It's a good question. It's difficult to tell. I never analyzed the particular figures in relation to Messina Denaro.
Yeah.
You have to operate with a little bit of caution in this, because the figures, you know, the authorities have a certain vested interest in bigging up the figures. Not all of that turns into cash, you know, for the state.
Correct.
I'm not quite sure, but it seems clearly, I mean, the reason why the Corleonesi fought the Second Mafia War in the early 1980s was to take control of the Sicilian end of the heroin pipeline to the United States. So clearly narcotics are part of it, but that then, you know, one of the things, again, that makes mafia organizations is they straddle the divide between the lawful economy and the underground economy, you know, narcotics typically, and so on and so forth. So that money some would have been salted away. A lot would have been spent on his clientele, keeping his people happy, you know, maintaining the organization, maintaining his prestige, sort of, you know, frittered away, if you like, in that sense. But a lot of it, of course, then gets invested, laundered, you know.
Yeah, like anything else. So in terms of Cosa Nostra, so another thing that I found interesting is, and you know Italy better than anybody. You know Italians. I'm Italian American. We're very like high strung people. But I remember asking Salvo when the bombing went off in Capace, Totorino was watching TV and didn't flinch as if he was watching a Serie A game. You know what? What type of person is this?
Well, it's clearly somebody who'd kind of begun at that stage. Riina had begun to believe his own publicity, I think.
Yeah, good point. Like the magician who believes his own tricks.
Yeah. I mean, he had he'd embarked on this war against the state. Crazy, crazy, you
Yeah.
know. Partly this was because in the 1970s, early 80s, this was in the air in Italy. This was the
Correct.
era of terrorist outrages from both left and right, when bombings, assassinations seemed like part of the political language, and the state seemed very weak. And Riina seemed to think that the vast income from heroin that he'd now got hold of by murdering the sort of Gambino Inzerillo and expelling the Gambino Inzerillo people in Sicily, meant that he could dictate terms to politics. The Sicilian mafia has always had a kind of a partnership relationship with politics, right back to the start, right back to those revolutionary days I talked about in 1860. But it was kind of an equal partnership in some ways. Yeah, there was the odd kidnapping here and there and that sort of thing, and you know, but broadly speaking, mafiosi let the politicians get on with their job, knew that theirs was a specialist role and they needed to say what they needed to say, and they, you know, do what they needed to do, and they were able to funnel votes, take advantage of contracts they were able to get hold of. There was a sort of symbiosis there. Riina seemed to think that his huge power to kill, because he'd basically developed a system of having teams of underground killers. He had enough money to pay permanent teams of hidden killers, basically, to get rid of his enemies. That huge power of violence freed him from the obligation to kind of have this relationship of give and take with politics. One by one, you know, the number of murders of politicians, and politicians from the Christian Democrat Party, who were the party traditionally allied with, you see that relationship shift. And by the mid-80s, you know, Cosa Nostra is telling the Christian Democrats who to pick as candidates. And as a result, the important politicians are leaving. They say, I can't do this. I didn't come into politics to risk my life.
Correct.
The most significant case of this is in 1980. Giulio Andreotti, 7 times Prime Minister of Italy, according to the court, you know, papers, when he went on trial, Andreotti went on trial in the early 1990s, did business with the Sicilian mafia through the 70s. Most of it mediated by his political lieutenant, Salvo Lima, who was the son of a mafia killer from the 1930s and was now a politician. And Andreotti did business with them, and he found out before it was going to happen that the mafia was going to kill the senior representative of his party in Sicily, a guy called Mattarella, who's the brother of the current president of the Republic of Italy. And he said, well, you can't do that. You know, that's crazy. And it wasn't even Riina at this stage. It was his predecessor of boss of all bosses, Stefano Bontate, who said, well, yes, we can, because we're in charge. And they killed him. And at that point, I mean, it's horrible killing. They shot him dead in front of his kids and his wife. And at that point, Piersanti Mattarella, his name was. At that point, Andreotti said, whoa, you know, I'm out of here. And the Sicilian mafia is thereby lost a kind of hugely important political relationship. And gradually over the coming years, more politicians would step back. Even Salvo Lima, this guy I said,
which was his
son of a
demise,
mafia killer, decides, I think I'd rather go and be a member of the European Parliament than get involved in the nitty-gritty of day-to-day Sicilian politics, where if they're going to whack me for stepping out of line. And of
Yep.
course, he would eventually be killed
Correct.
early in 1992.
Yeah.
So there was this mania of Riina's. And of course, when the strategy failed by 1992, actually earlier than that, 91 and late 91, it
Yeah.
was really clear that this strategy had completely failed. It had been
Correct.
counterproductive. The state hadn't crumpled
Yeah.
in the face of this all. It had geared itself up. Falcone and Borsellino had successfully steered the Maxi trial through,
Yep.
which was about to be confirmed in the Supreme Court. Riina had lost.
Yeah.
And his life was forfeit. And
Yeah.
the only option he had at that point was to tell everybody it's going to be okay. We just need one more big bomb, one more atrocity, and we'll do it. And, whether he really believed that or whether he just believed it because he had to believe it, because the alternative was being killed by his own people for his massive failure of leadership.
I always wonder about the Salvo Lima thing, where allegedly Salvo Lima said, you know what, I'm going to get the Maxi people repealed, or basically going to help you guys out.
Yeah.
And he didn't. So I'm wondering, did he negotiate in bad faith, or did Salvo Lima really think he can do it, but people turned his back on him and left
that I'd really pay good money to know that. Was this Riina saying it's okay? Was this Riina saying to Salvo Lima, you're the politician, you sort it out?
Correct.
Whatever the truth, Riina certainly told his men that Lima had made promises to him, and it then suited Riina to be able to say, we were betrayed.
Yeah.
We were betrayed by, wasn't my fault. I was betrayed. And the same thing happened to the, was it Nino Salvo?
Yeah.
One of these two cousins who were both men of honor.
Yeah.
Who ran Italy's tax collection franchise.
They had the contract to collect all the taxes.
If you want to know what state Sicily was in the 1980s, two men of honor collected most of, perfectly legally, had the contract to collect Sicily's taxes and took a 10% cut. 10% of the tax income, which obviously then fed into the political machine and into Cosa Nostra and so on.
One before we get on to the other organized crime groups in Italy, one area that I'm having a hard time, maybe I don't want to find out about, but I'm having a hard time finding out about, and it's coming more to light, is this notion, and I think you touch on this a little bit, is a high mafia, kind of like La Santa. Invisible mafiosi, judges, lawyers, politicians, that the gray area that's really pulling the strings.
Yeah.
There's not.
It doesn't exist.
Really?
No. Okay. La Santa exists.
Yeah.
But it is not what particularly magistrates and even some members of the Ndrangheta thought that it was at the start.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about
that. As has now become much clearer. In fact, the Ndrangheta, for those of you who are not aware, is a similar organization to the Sicilian Mafia, and in that it's got this same Masonic organization. It's a secret society with its own weird myths and its rituals that you have to take, a blood oath that you take when you're initiated and so on. But one very important difference with the Ndrangheta, this is the Mafia of Calabria, the area in the toe of the boot. One important, where Anastasia came from, one important difference with the Ndrangheta is that whereas the Sicilian Mafia has just one ritual, and it's the same one used in its cousin organization in the States, sister organization in the States. One threshold to cross to become a man of honor. And generally speaking, that threshold is high. You have to be watched carefully. You have to observe. You generally have to have killed somebody, historically speaking, to get across that threshold. In the Ndrangheta, it's not the threshold is much lower. You know, they initiate babies and kids, and you know, there's even a little initiation rituals for babies. But what happens is that the selection process
to get to
the selection process that in Cosa Nostra is just on the threshold of the organization, in the Ndrangheta happens inside. And what you have is a whole ladder of different ranks, if you like, different measures of status, which they call doti or gif. Right. And each one of these, these have characterized the Ndrangheta since the very beginning, since it emerged from the prison system in the 1880s. And La Santa is just another one of these, because they keep getting added on top. There's a sort of inflation.
Correct.
These doti. Okay, so it's not some superstructure, some super Ndrangheta. Like all mafia organizations, the Ndrangheta has a problem with one of its key resources. One of its key resources is its contacts in the upper world, in the world of politics and the institutions.
Because they're bumping into it in a way, because you're making so much money. You're dealing
well, it's less that they're bumping into it, in that is a resource, but you don't want the other members of the mafia to know, because they're so precious that for reasons of secrecy, for reasons of greed, you want to keep those contacts for yourself.
Correct.
So you tend to have to protect that. And the Ndrangheta, like it does most things, does it formally with rituals. And La Santa seems to be have been doing that. It's like a way of saying, okay, initially it was only 24 members, then 33, then it grew. You know, if you pass La Santa ritual, you become one of the real elite who can contact the really powerful people.
Correct.
I mean, how much of that true, and how much of it is just promising to big yourself up? That's always the dilemma with these things. And after La Santa,
well, there's allegedly
there's more and more and more.
That's to say, there's even higher now, right?
They keep inventing new ones. I don't know about you, but the BBC News, you know, everybody once upon a time, people just used to be foreign correspondent. Now the titles are, you know, it's world affairs editor and global, you know, the titles have been bigged up, presumably is to do with various pay packages and deals that have gone on over the years. So, you know, mafia organizations wouldn't be mafia organizations if they didn't have these contacts. You know, this resource. So that's nothing new. That's, you know, it's just La Santa is just a way of managing it. And it has an ulterior motive as well, in that it's a way of excluding other members of the Ndrangheta. And that's why when the Santa was first invented, it was invented in the context of tensions in the early 1970s that would lead, basically associated to do with a big injection of investment into Calabria, government investment, construction and all that kind of stuff, that led to what was called the First Ndrangheta War from 74 to 76. And La Santa was part of the maneuvering before that war broke out.
One of the staunch differences, aside from the dog, we know this, is a lot of blood relatives or familiar relatives, or they really got to know you. And like you said, different process and the structure makes them very strong. I look at the business model and how Ndrangheta arose, right? So they basically kidnapped a whole bunch of people, to the point there was like the sequester season in Corriere della Stampa, like, hey, these people kidnapped, make sure you pay. So they basically made a ton of money in kidnapping. And this is where, and we'll talk about it on the tail end, is where it differed than, I think, Cosa Nostra and differed than American Cosa Nostra. They said, okay, wow, we have cash. We're going to do one thing, and aside for construction and pizza, but we'll do one thing, and we'll do one thing well. We're going to buy and distribute coke. Not heroin, because they die and they're lower rent people per se, but coke people have money, upper crust of society, and we're just going to do really well and dominate. And then skyrocketed versus my opinion, versus Cosa Nostra's blowing up judges, and American Cosa Nostra, the commission's getting put away. From a business perspective, not the moral, because we're just having a business discussion, an academic discussion, it was kind of brilliant. What are your thoughts on the rise of Ndrangheta and how they did it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can date the rise of the Ndrangheta further back. It's a long, slow process. But in these mafias really don't make a lot of the conditions that make them successful.
Correct. They
whatever, they adapt.
Prohibition.
The Ndrangheta's entry into cocaine is really when in the early 90s, late 80s, is when cocaine is, you know, really entering Europe big time. And it's not like they've spotted this market opportunity. It's just that it's all over the place. They where you're right, I think, is that the Sicilian mafia becomes a much less reliable partner for some of the kind of producer cartels in South America and so on, because it's collapsing. So that's absolutely right. But the Ndrangheta, and you're right that the kidnapping season starts earlier than that, and a lot of that money goes into things like sort of front companies for construction and stuff like that. It goes into the usual mafia form of diversification, you know. But they'd been into cigarette smuggling before. So I mean, you're right about the kidnapping. The Sicilian mafia traditionally doesn't engage in kidnapping. It was a tool used against the mafia's own rules by Riina in order to establish some capital in the 70s, and also to maneuver politically against his internal enemies within the Sicilian mafia. The Ndrangheta's rise really goes, you know, it's to do with that big economic boom in Italy after the Second World War, when Italy goes generally from being a kind of peasant society to being cutting edge industrial power, and you get lots of motorways being built, you get big new markets, you know what I mean, fruit and vegetable central markets, the Ndrangheta straight in on that, all the money. And cigarettes, there's a huge boom in cigarette consumption, and there's the massive you know, the cigarette economy was colossal. Smuggled cigarette economy was colossal in Italy after the Second World War. So all of those things are rather than the Ndrangheta being particularly canny, you know, far-sighted in terms of business, that's what starts it.
Well, structurally, though, what fascinates me about Ndrangheta is, and you said it yourself just earlier, the Cosa Nostra in Sicily and the Cosa Nostra US, you know, brother and sister, but different organizations, where Ndrangheta has cells in Australia. And Antonio Nacasa kind of explained to me, and I don't think it's clear, maybe Canada might be on its own, but for the most part, as I understand, the Drini that's on the 6 continents, for the most part, report back to Calabria in some way or form. Do you agree with that, or is your research found?
Yeah, it seems pretty clear that they do. I mean, we don't know how dense that pattern of relationships is. You know, we need to know much more about that. And when the Australian police, they're starting to get their act together, we may well find out more. But it's clear, you know, that they have the same structure there, the same structure of locals and so on, the same rituals, the same. And you can't have that unless there's somebody kind of supervising the brand, if you like, supervising the franchise and saying, okay, yeah, you're authorized, you're okay. So yes, that's absolutely true. The Ndrangheta is much, much better at colonizing different territories than is the Sicilian mafia. Sicilian mafia's only really managed it in the United States, you know, and that goes way, you know, that's way back to the kind of 1880s, to that lemon business that I talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
Whereas the Ndrangheta, you know, Canada, you know, it's there in the coal fields of Pennsylvania, this controlling the labor force there before the First World War. Australia, as you said, from the 1920s and 30s. And then in the post-war period, very quickly into northern and central Italy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a very distinctive thing, and it is that sort of more franchisey structure.
Yeah.
And you can put in the same bag also the creation of whole new mafias in Puglia. The Sacra Corona Unita is a kind of offshoot of the 'Ndrangheta. And that's a remarkable, and it's to do with a sort of looser form of control, you know, the more franchisey model. Yeah, and while maintaining very close links to particular locals in Calabria, in the home territory.
Interesting. So we're going to kind of round out the Italian side of things with the Camorra, which, in my opinion, kind of morphed over the years, especially, you know, with Raffaele Imperiale getting caught. I got a little pushback from your colleague Anna Sergi. She didn't like the. And it's funny because, like, I'm happy to talk to you. I was happy to talk to her. So excited, and I kind of brought up the idea of a super cartel, and like she super poo-pooed it and like crushed my soul.
Quite right.
She crushed my soul. So where do you land on the super cartel? Can I maybe salvage this idea, or do I have to take my ball and go home?
No, I don't think that's right. I mean, you know, mafia organizations look different according to where you're standing when you look at them.
Good point.
You're standing on the territory, what you see is a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Because they're there to control that territory, and they have to have a hierarchy to resolve disputes. If you've got a road being built through 3 adjacent territories, you need to be able to people to get round a table and somebody able to adjudicate and say, okay, you get this much from that point to that point, then they pay you for that point to it, and you resolve disputes. You need that hierarchy. You also need, you know, and that's where they have a command structure. When it comes to things like international narcotics dealing, they tend to be much more a kind of anybody can get into it. They just take advantage of the opportunities they've got, which with whatever networks they've got, whether those are networks that are inside the criminal organization or outside or kind of overlapping. It's much more of a free-for-all because this is a much more you know, unstable and unpredictable area. And it's not, exactly, it's not regulated.
Interesting. Now, the Camorra, how does it differ in your studies? Again, not from a moral aspect, but what do you like about it? Its advantage versus the other mafias, what disadvantages?
Well, the Camorra, at least since is not a single organization. Okay, it's a kind of archipelago of a world of gangs that can be nothing more like street corner kids dealing drugs, to something which is more like a mafia, which is, you know, has the territorial control, has the bridgehead into the lawful economy and into politics and all that kind of thing. At various points in its long history, the Camorra has been a sworn secret society, like the Sicilian Mafia and like the 'Ndrangheta. That fell apart before the First World War in something called a big trial called the Cuocolo trial. There was an attempt to revive it, partly inspired again by the 'Ndrangheta.
With Cutolo, or is that something
Cutolo, yes. Raffaele Cutolo, who did it all incredibly from within prison, which is, of course, where the Camorra and the 'Ndrangheta really originated. But since then, it's this sort of world, slightly anarchic world. you know, the telltale stat, if you want, is that the average life expectancy of a Camorra boss is a hell of a lot lower than the average life expectancy of a Sicilian mafia boss, because it's a more violent, more chaotic reality. Very interesting. I was talking to lots of law enforcement people in the province of Caserta very recently, about the Casalesi. I don't know if you've heard of the Casalesi. Casal di Principe. These were the people, they were the most powerful of the Camorra clans in the 80s, really. And they were the people who threatened the guy who wrote Gomorrah, Roberto Saviano, and so on. And they're in bits now. They really are in bits. Not just the bosses, but the sons of the bosses are in jail. The bits that are left.
You had a revolt too, right? When the if I'm not mistaken, because they were actually linked to the Gambino family, and they were very prominent. And then they kind of fell apart.
Their founder, who would end up being murdered, we think murdered by his own men with an axe, was, I think, was also an affiliated member of Cosa Nostra, and had, you know, drug dealing links. But again, they were at that peak. They had the politicians, they had the links to construction in particular. But that's kind of fallen apart, and what you've got is a kind of, and I think this is a glance kind of into the future of Italy's mafia organizations more generally, as the repressive move gains more and more ground, is that you're going to get a kind of separation between a sort of kind of street crime on the one hand, and then on the other, the kind of white collar criminals who used to be part of the same system, floating off and forming kind of looser networks, which you know, don't seem to operate with, you know, with guns in the hands, but with laptops. That kind of
that's where it's going. And to kind of round out is American Cosa Nostra, which, you know, relatively speaking, is in shambles. Let's call it what it is, right? And what I'm fascinated, if I got to ask you one question, it'd be this: is I looked at, you know, the Italian diaspora. You had, you know, Australia, Argentina, you know, Canada, obviously US, Venezuela. And I look at it and say, okay, wait a second. What commonalities does the three organizations we aforementioned with American Cosa Nostra? Okay, they're all Italian, great, or Italian American lineage. Then I say, okay, well, did the Cosa Nostra and Ndrangheta strive in Canada? For the most part, they're doing pretty well. Australia, they're striving, yes. Germany, Luxembourg, wherever you look, right? But in Italy, I mean, US, where the biggest market is, and the biggest market opportunity, and the most could be the most powerful organization out there worldwide. And I get the RICO, and I get all the talking points, but mafias survived in other areas that had tough laws too, Interpol and so forth. So why did the American Cosa Nostra kind of break down, why other Cosa Nostras at the bare minimum survived and strived? And I have one theory, well, two theories. One is the lack of connection to the homeland to get new troops, and number two is the lack of adaptation of drugs. I felt the American Cosa Nostra, why they had the heroin pipelines, should have went to the Colombians and said, hey, we got this. Get it over to us. We'll take care of it. They didn't do it. That's just my quick nutshell theory. I spent a little time on it. But give me where you land on American Cosa Nostra, why it demise specifically versus other Italian organizations grew.
You brush past RICO quickly, but that
well,
really
I don't want to soft shoe it, but you know,
that, you know, that is really, really crucial. We forget that law enforcement is the major factor in historical shifts in the fortunes of criminal organizations. And the fact that RICO and its Italian equivalent,
41 bis,
were applied at the same time on both sides of the Atlantic, in the Commission trial and the Maxi trial in Palermo, because they were mutually reinforcing systems, the Sicilian side and the US side,
Yeah.
mutually reinforcing. You know, there's a long, long history that goes all the way back of personnel, commodities, swapping backwards and forwards across the Atlantic, reinforcing each other, supporting each other in time, learning from one another. And the fact that, you know, that this repression happened in both places at the same time, and then with one or two setbacks has been maintained over time, is the major factor. And it's what, you know, that's the lesson that Italy has learned, and that's why it's doing so much better against mafia organizations these days. So that's the key thing in my view.
No, I didn't mean to gloss over it, but I just felt like, don't get me wrong, Rico's obviously very important in that organization. But then you're a smart guy. Then, if let's say we were consulting them, right? I would say, great. Then operate like a terror cell. If Rico gets you for centralization, then decentralize, right? Decentralize.
In Sicily, since the 1982 Rognoni La Torre law, it's Italy's version of the RICO Act, was passed, took effect. You know, the greatest expression of that was the Palermo Maxi trial, which was confirmed. The verdict was confirmed in the Supreme Court in 1992. 1993, the Commission of Cosa Nostra was meeting, and Riina was on his way to a meeting when he was arrested. Since then, Cosa Nostra has tried 4 times to reform the commission. Each time, the authorities have been watching, filming them. You can watch the videos of the meeting on YouTube, you know, and they've all gone to prison.
Wow.
Now, is that because they're stupid and they keep banging their head against a wall and doing the same stupid thing instead of becoming more decentralized? Or is it because they really can't operate successfully without that lever of dispute resolution? Because that's what it is. You know, when we talk about a commission, we love to think about it as a kind of the board of you know, the board of directors of an international company or something. It's not. Its primary function is as a kind of court, for a star chamber for resolving disputes, to put a dampener on the violence that is integral to the world of organized crime.
Interesting.
And the result without that coordination is chaos. It slows things down massively. It leads to misunderstanding. It leads to bloodshed. It leads to, you know, higher degree of mistrust, therefore more people turning state's evidence. They need it. They need it. You know, a mafia organization without that element of coordination isn't a mafia organization. It's a load of gangs.
Yeah, good point. It would decipher them. So, kind of segue lastly, and it does nicely to your last book, The Craft. And I'm gonna put a link to John's site below where you can get his books and that kind of stuff. Highly encourage it. And I'm gonna do some book reviews, and I'm really excited just to speak to him. And then I want to deep dive in each of his books. One of the areas that, secondly, the lack of adaptation of drugs in the U.S. I felt the American Cosa Nostra, where they kind of failed lastly, is where they think they, and I'll get your feedback on the Italian side, is I'm an Italian American, right? And my family's from Italy. I'm born here. I'm into the culture and everything else. And I go on, who becomes an engineer, who becomes a doctor, who becomes a lawyer, right? Versus a lot of the guys that went into the life were frankly, you know, uneducated, or just guys that were not the little rough around the edges, not the cream of the crop in terms of intellect, etc. So I wonder why did the American Cosa Nostra, and if so, did any other organization adopt this into more of a Freemasonry type thing, where they say, you know what, you're going to be a lawyer, Tom. You're going to be a doctor. We're going to support the healthcare system. You're going to be a judge, and put people out there like Freemasons, go to more of a higher class. And let's be honest, John, they could live off their reputation. You know, maybe 5% of them are hitters or Sicario, and very rarely use. They kind of hang out, or you probably could live off your reputation. Why don't they adopt a bigger global mentality of Freemasonry? And if so, is there an organization that did that maybe internationally?
Because it's not that easy to come across that kind of talent.
Okay. Good
Yeah.
point. Good point.
You know, the Sicilian Mafia has a long, long, long tradition of having lawyers and so on, and doctors, particularly amazing number of doctors and surgeons who are particularly useful when you're talking about infiltrating the state healthcare system.
Yeah.
A huge amount of money to be creamed off there. I'm not sure in the States that was quite the same. Where in, you know, risky generalization, but in the States, you know, talking over the big sweep of historical time, the people it worked with within the institutions, within politics and so on, tended to be external people rather than people whose dad was a killer and you know, who had made that leap up. And it probably also helps that in Sicily, you know, the economy's a mess. It's on the margins of Europe. It's not, there aren't a lot of other opportunities going round. The state takes the biggest part of the economy, and the state is always vulnerable. I mean, private enterprise is too, but the Sicilian Mafia has developed over the years to be able to you know, milk the state for income through construction contracts and whatever it might be.
Interesting. So we're going to wrap it up with a question I ask all my prominent guests related to organized crime. If you could have dinner with anybody dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oh, no contest. It'd be Giovanni Falcone, I think.
Ooh, that's the first time I heard that one. That's a good one.
Really amazing. Oh,
usually they picked them up. You know who Antonio Nicasso picked? Massimo Sino Dinero. I was surprised, a little shocked.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was that before he was captured?
Before he was captured. Now he's probably they're now talking to him, but
okay, interesting. Giovanni Falcone. Actually, the other person would be another representative of law and order, a 19th century policeman that I talk about in my book Mafia Brotherhoods, called Ermanno Sangiorgi, who was chief of police of Palermo at the very end of the 19th century. He was the man, when he was a young inspector in the 1870s, who first discovered the Mafia's initiation ritual.
Oh, wow.
For example. Oh, yeah. He's an amazing guy. And I've written a sort of mini biography of him.
Oh, wow.
So he would be a close second to Falcone.
I thought you were going to say Iron Prefect for a second. I got nervous.
No.
Well, John, listen, you've been more than generous for your time. Mostly we have about 30% ex-US audience, UK and so forth, but we're primarily a US show. Maybe give a shout out. How can people find you on social, etc.? I'm going to put links below.
Will do.
If you want to shout yourself out, and we'll before we conclude.
Okay, brilliant. It's been great to talk, Tom.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, John. Thank you.
All the best.
Ciao, ciao.